Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome back to another new episode of The Lager Line, again served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. I'm Ben Dubose, your host, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, and contributor to Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. I'm joined by Paulo Alves, our co-host and producer out of Portugal. You can follow him on Twitter/X at Paulo Alves NBA, and me at Ben Dubose. As we chat this Tuesday, December 10th, it's a big week ahead for the Rockets. They've got the NBA Cup quarterfinal coming up Wednesday night against the Warriors, who they have now lost to 15 consecutive times, longest active streak among all 30 teams in the association. And then this coming weekend, either you're going to Las Vegas for the NBA Cup semifinals against the winner of Oklahoma City, Dallas. That's the other quarterfinal in the West. Or you'll be playing the loser of Oklahoma City and Dallas on the road on Sunday. So either way, it's going to be a fairly challenging week for the Rockets, and they don't enter it with a ton of momentum. They're coming off a 1-2 stretch in that California road trip where they lost in Sacramento and at Golden State, of course, last week, before wrapping up with a win at Los Angeles and the Clippers, the James Harden-less Clippers, but a quality squad nonetheless that's sixth in the Western Conference on Sunday night. Rockets weren't at full strength themselves, missing Fred VanVleet and Tari Eason. And before we get into thoughts on the Cup, predictions, matchups, I want to start by looking back at the week that was, and really the 2 weeks that was, because I'm sort of torn on how to contextualize all of this. So when we recorded a week ago, I think with the Rockets then at 15-6 and number 2 in the West, if you had told us that the Rockets would go 1-2 on the road trip, we would have been underwhelmed. Not stunned by any means, but especially 1-2, and one of the losses being to the Warriors without Steph, without Draymond, that streak continuing for a team that, when we were recording a week ago, was flying high. We would have felt like, that's not so great. With that said, you also have to zoom out a little bit. And when we recorded our schedule preview show back in August or whatever it was, the past 2 weeks on paper were amongst the most difficult all season. You had the Minnesota-Philly back-to-back on the road. Then you had the Thunder and this 3-game road trip in California. So 5 of 6 on the road. The one home game was against the Thunder. And you went 4-2. So I know you front-loaded it by going 3-0 the week of Thanksgiving and now 1-2. But when you go 3-0, you do provide yourself with a little bit of a margin for error. And inevitably, injuries are going to creep in over a long season. I think losing Tari the final 2 games and Fred the final game, and it looked like Fred was limited by injury in the game before that against the Warriors. That stuff can happen over a long season, and that's why when things are going well for you, you need to make hay, and that's what they did in that 3-0 week. And when you zoom out and you see 4-2 on one of your most difficult stretches of the entire year, even though, the glass half empty case is, well, they left some stuff on the table over the past week. The glass half full case is, look, you just wrapped up what on paper was one of your most difficult stretches all year with a winning record. And a team that was horrible on the road for most of last season somehow went 4-2 in a stretch where 5 were on the road and all against quality competition. Now, I know they had some positive injury luck in there. You can certainly point to the fact that, the Sixers didn't have Embiid and Paul George. The Warriors obviously didn't have Curry and Draymond, although Rockets lost that game anyway, so what does that mean? The Clippers didn't have James Harden, although the Rockets, again, didn't have Fred and Tari, so I think that sort of offsets a little bit. But I think, first off, injuries tend to even out over a season anyway. And secondly, we knew going into this year, the Rockets were the type of team, younger and with a lot more depth, there's veterans like Aaron Holiday, Jay Tate near the end of the bench that you can plug and play, and both of those did a nice job in the win against the Clippers on Sunday. That should give the Rockets a few advantages from time to time. And other teams that are more reliant on veterans that don't have the depth, that'll occasionally catch up with them over the 82-game grind. And so even if the Rockets in this stretch have had some fortuitous injury luck, the Rockets by design perhaps are in position to have a little bit more of that over the season, and that's what we're seeing. But I just think in the big picture, to have these types of results in a 2-week sample that on paper, based on what we saw from all of last season and the way these teams profile talent-wise, was going to be amongst your most difficult all year, even if the last week was underwhelming, even if some of your big guys, most notably Alperen and Sengun, aren't playing quite as well as they were a week or two ago, at the end of the day, I think the good outweighs the bad, at least as of now, when you zoom out a little bit. Now, I might revisit this in a few days if they lose to the Warriors again, this time at home. If they also lose, and they'll probably be an underdog at Oklahoma City or at Dallas if they do lose to the Warriors and thus don't advance to the Cup semifinals. So perhaps I'm feeling differently when we record again in a week. But right now, 30,000-foot view, a little frustrated, some warning signs. We'll see what happens with Fred and the knee, because it's, if they're without Fred for any period of time, it could get dicey in a hurry because of the lack of ball control otherwise. But I think as of now, even with the 2 losses, I feel like the good largely outweighs the bad as far as, well, certainly the overall record, 16-8, number 3 in the West, just a half game back of Memphis for number 2. But even when we look at December specifically, even with an underwhelming week, I feel like it's tough to be too down on them right now. Is that sort of where you're at, or what are your feelings as we're, looking at this upcoming NBA Cup stretch?
I'll be totally honest from the get-go. I did not watch the games live, so I didn't get the feel for these are West Coast games, 3 a.m. games. It's just during the week, it's not feasible for me. But I kept up with everybody's comments over the weekend, and I watched here and there. And my main takeaway is, and I think this stat's going to scare a lot of people, would you guess that currently, as a 6'11" big man, Alperen Sengun has the same true shooting as Jalen Green?
I actually knew that because I was running the numbers for a Rockets Wire post earlier today, but if I had not run the numbers, I would not have guessed that. That is pretty stunning.
That's actually insane. Like, we have said that Jalen Green's having an awful season, that he's not worth his contract. And in the NBA, the expectation or the average true shooting for the center or for a big man is always higher than it is for a guard like Jalen. And obviously, it's a bit skewed because Jalen has had, 2 of the last 3 games have been pretty good efficiency-wise. But to me, that's the reason why we haven't been able to sustain winning, or it hasn't been as clear-cut as it has been earlier in the season, because we are better enough at scoring. We need our go-to guy to be, and that Alperen Sengun, obviously, we need him to be at the very least average efficiency-wise. And I don't know what's happening. I don't think it's a problem long-term, because I think it's more of a fluke than it is anything that we should be concerned about. But 53.4% true shooting for a center is concerning. And you can make different arguments. You can say that he's missing bunnies that he typically doesn't. You can go the other way and say, is it because he's taking worse shots than he used to? Or is it because teams are defending him different ways? Or are we giving him less space to operate? You can make all sorts of arguments, but the truth is, Jalen hasn't been good. But Alperen Sengun hasn't been good either. And when that's the case, you're going to struggle. I mean, the Rockets scored 93 points against the Warriors. And against the Kings, who are a terrible defensive team that live and die by being explosive offensively, they scored 111 and gave up 120. It's kind of the law of the game. We need to be able to score better, especially in games where we're not going to have Tari Eason, for example, the Warriors game. So yeah, my main takeaway is we need our offensive go-to guys to be able to score at the very least a league average efficiency for us to be competing regularly. Because yes, our effort can take us far, but it can only take us so far. And as we've talked about earlier or in previous spots, effort's something that can waver depending on multiple things like, where the game's played. If it's at home, how much rest time have you had? Even just morale things that happen throughout the game. And when that's the case, you need to be able to have someone pick up that slack. And usually that's one of your top 2 or top 3, depending on the team, offensive players. And it's just not been happening. And I think, as I said, I'm not worried going forward. I think if you sold me on foreign to over in a stretch where we play the Wolves, the Thunder, the Kings, and the Warriors, I would probably taken it. I don't think it's the best we could have done, but it's okay. And we're not going to finish at 60 wins. So both for our expectations preseason and for our expectations right now, I think it's okay. It's not great. It's not terrible. No need to panic.
With Tari, to follow up, I think he will be available for this Wednesday's game against the Warriors. We'll find out later this afternoon. The Rockets will practice, and perhaps Ime will tip his hand then. If not, the pregame injury report will come out tonight. That's Tuesday night, about 24 hours before tip-off. But he suffered a concussion in the Kings game, which was a week ago Tuesday, and then he missed the last 2. The average concussion absence in the NBA is about 6 days. And this weekend in LA, he obviously didn't play, but he did participate in parts of practice. Basically, the NBA has like a 5-phase process, and as Jonathan Fagan of the Chronicle reported it, that was phase 3. So with that being at about 4 days out of the usual 6, it seems like that everything was pointing towards this being not a prolonged absence, this being basically right on schedule, the average absence for an NBA concussion right at about 6 days. And that would be around Monday or Tuesday of this week, i.e. before Wednesday night's game against the Warriors, which will be nationally televised, incredibly late because, of course, they stack the East and West together, and the West is going to be a little bit later just based on geography. But nonetheless, it's a big exposure game for the Rockets, and it's very helpful that Tari will be out there because the one stretch of sustained play the Rockets have had in a good way against the Warriors was that game in Houston at the beginning of November when, after falling behind by 30, the Rockets nearly rescued it, got it to overtime, and it was largely on the back of Tari Eason and Amen Thompson. Tari Eason, the best player on the floor in that game. And, there's a little bit of an asterisk you put on it and that there was no Steph Curry, but nonetheless, for the Rockets, the problems against the Warriors haven't even so much been on the defensive end. Now, there's certainly an argument you can make that even if they get better offensively, well, if they get worse defensively because you're going up against Steph, is it offset? Yeah, that's a fair concern. But I think in terms of fixing what's gone wrong, honestly, Steph's absence has not really been a big factor. The Rockets just have not scored, especially in the half court, against those guys. It goes back to last season. Look, we can talk about the 15-game streak, and people can and have fairly pointed out that 10 of the 15 were the Steven Silas tanking years. Okay, but still, 0-5 since Ime Udoka took over, since the start of the current era, which is basically Ime, Fred, and Dylan Brooks, to still not have success, even with Curry out for a couple of those games, it points to something structural. And I think it's especially the case offensively, where if you remember the game in April when the Rockets were basically eliminated from postseason contention last year, they fell behind by 20 in the first quarter or so. They were even worse in that game I just referenced at the start of this season in Houston, falling behind by 30. And then the one last Thursday in San Francisco, they scored just 93 points, and it was a slog on the offensive end of the court. At halftime, Fred, Jalen, and Sengun combined for just 9 points on like 20% shooting. It was terrible. Nobody had it going on. And I think the one semblance of sustained success that they've had was that opening game at Toyota Center. But again, that wasn't in the half court. It was when Tari and Amin just made it just a frenetic scramble sequence in the second half. And to their credit, they're really good players. They made it happen. But against a Warriors team, especially one that's likely to have Steph and Draymond both, you're going to have to execute in the half court. And even if we take out the Steven Silas era and say the 15-game streak is exaggerated, okay, well, the 0-5 is not exaggerated. The Rockets have trouble scoring in the half court against this team. And so that's going to be a big question moving forward. And so to sort of tie that in with what we've seen over the past week, I think, the Jalen Green performances have been very up and down, but I think there is something of a pattern to those. There's a lot of randomness, but there is a pattern to the randomness in that he does a lot of the heavy lifting in games where there isn't a lot of elite rim protection or length. Certainly the Sixers game where he went for nearly set his career high with 41 points, the overtime win, there was no Embiid. But last week, the Kings with Sabonis, that was a big part of how, I mean, honestly, that wasn't a bad showing for the Rockets. They led by double digits midway through the game. It wasn't until the Kings just had just a magnet ball stretch in the second half where I think they made like 15 straight shots where they pulled away. But yeah, the Kings, they don't have a ton of length on the perimeter and they don't really have a rim protector. Well, that's the type of matchups that Jalen typically does well against. And he did drop nearly 30 on good efficiency. And Sunday, the Clippers, you pointed this out a month ago, Paolo. We were talking about how the Rockets matched up with the Clippers before that back-to-back they had, well, 2 games in 3 nights, but back-to-back against the same opponent when the Rockets faced the Clippers in Houston. You said that you thought on paper that the Clippers were a really favorable matchup for the Rockets, and boy, has that proven to be the case. Rockets have won all 3 by at least 8 points, and they've now secured any potential tiebreaker. It absolutely is conceivable the Rockets and Clippers could be in a tie. Right now, Clippers 14-11, 6th in the West, which is the final non-play-in spot. Rockets at 16-8 in the 3 seed. So the fact that you've already got a tiebreaker, if those teams end up tied at the end of the year, that's potentially really valuable. But yeah, Paolo, you pointed out correctly that was a friendly matchup for the Rockets. And even though the Clippers, they're a good defensive team overall, they do it more with fundamentals and discipline more so than, elite talent in terms of size or rim protection. Zubac is a good big man, but he's not the type of guy that just shuts down the paint. And so when you see the Rockets go up against a team that has at least a lot of size overall or a big rim protector, I wouldn't say the Warriors with Looney have a great rim protector, but they do have a lot of size when you factor in Looney and Draymond when he plays and Kuminga and just the stable of wings they can throw out there. And they're even longer when Steph isn't part of the games, which was the case last week. Then that's tougher for Jalen to get going. I'm not going to say that, Andrew Wiggins too. Paolo just made that point in our chat. So yeah, there's a lot of collective length, even if they don't really have an elite rim protector. And so while not impossible for Jalen to get going against a team like that, for the most part, that's not the type of team that we've seen him thrive against. And even if you go back to last March, when we know he went off, look, that was a weaker stretch of the schedule for the Rockets. And we knew it. It doesn't take anything away. But in terms of, predictive value, it's not the type of team that you go into the game saying, I think Jalen Green is going to go off in this game. It's not that he can't, but it's a little less likely, and you take it as a bonus if it happens. For me, it's the type of matchup where you need Alperen Sengun to do what the best player on a good team is supposed to do, and he just didn't do it until the 4th quarter in Golden State, and by that point, it was too little, too late, and I think, some mental factors came into play once they started trailing by a decent margin in the second half, and we all know the losing streak. I think there was some bad body language. There's a little bit of here we go again, and while Sengun ultimately got it to go down for him the first 3 quarters, he didn't finish at the rim. He didn't do the things we know he's capable of, especially based on last season. I know he hasn't done it this year, but I still tend to think, as you said, that's largely missing bunnies, small sample size, it will correct. And so if Sengun isn't giving you for most of that game what he's capable of, and Fred is also underperforming, and I think some of that could be the knee. As mentioned, that's one. You're not really worried about Tari and the concussion. With Fred and the knee, that's to be determined because there's a little bit more to it when you're talking about, a knee hyperextension for an NBA guard that needs at least some burst. So hopefully these few days off, Rockets only have 1 game in a stretch of like 8 days will help him get better, but we'll see. But I just feel like the Warriors are just not the type of matchup where you go in expecting Jalen Green to be peak Jalen Green. Sengun, I think that's a little bit different. And it's really weird. Like, he's been bad against the Warriors this year. We all remember that first game in Houston. He didn't even play in the 4th quarter in overtime. But I went back and looked. The 2 games he played against the Warriors last year, he didn't play the one in April because he was out with the injury at that point. The 2 games he played, he averaged like 25 points and 10 boards a game on good efficiency. So I'm not sure what's going on. I don't think Kevon Looney is necessarily his kryptonite. I think some of it's mental. I think some of it's confidence. We heard Ime Udoka pointing to that. But I guess as I hand things back to you, Paolo, I'm curious your thoughts on the matchup. You made a really great call, as mentioned, about the Clippers being a favorable matchup for Houston. Do you have any theories for why the Warriors are, other than the mental side, and there's probably some of that, just this idea that the Rockets see the Warriors, and at this point, there's a lot of sort of mental baggage that until they beat them is going to be there. Other than that, is there anything else you see? Again, I can sort of see the length being a problem for Jalen, but not saying that Sengun should feast against those guys, not saying that Kevon Looney is an easy matchup for him or Trace Jackson Davis or whoever it is, but I don't think it's like a terrible matchup either. I feel like going into this cup game and looking at the past week, like that's 4-2 is fine over these past couple of weeks. 5-1 would be a home run. I feel like, to sum up what you were saying, 4-2 is, solid. It's a nice single, maybe a double. It's not a home run. 5-1 would have been a home run, and it was right there on the table in San Francisco. The Rockets couldn't get it done, and the biggest reason for that, in my opinion, is realistically, Sengun underperforming. So I'm just curious your thoughts on, I guess, A, Sengun specifically, and then B, just the Rockets' overall offense in the half court. That's the issue against the Warriors. When we look forward to this cup game moving forward, the Rockets have underperformed against the Warriors consistently, going back to really the entire tenure of Ime Udoka. So is there anything you see in that matchup that might make them disproportionately bad for the Rockets, aside from the mental baggage?
As a general trend for this Rockets team this season, it's really hard to figure out why they lose games or figure out types of teams that cause them trouble, because they perform pretty evenly across the board. Obviously, I singled out the Clippers as a bad matchup, a good matchup for us, but us being a bad matchup for them, because our pieces just really fit into what they're trying to do, and they don't have a lot of threats, and so it's easy for us to stick one of our best guys on James Harden and then just respect the guys that are shooters. But I think with the Warriors, I'm going to speak conceptually, right? Because they muddy up the game a lot, right? And they are big, but they're not tall. And so they're very much a stay in front of you, get you to shoot over us type of team. You really need a lot of those, that in between game, because they're going to stay in front of you. They're not going to let you get all the way to the rim. Obviously, the Rockets are not a good 3-point shooting team, and they didn't shoot well against the Warriors. On that game, they shot, I can double check, but they shot, 26%. The Rockets seem to really struggle against teams that really muddy things up, because the entire game plan is, we're going to out-rebound you if we miss shots. And the way the Rockets rebound is, they're not really going over people, right? It's not about their height. It's about positioning. It's about instinct. It's about kind of sneaking in and getting position and getting the offensive rebounds that way. And the Warriors are just so bulky in the way that they play, and they box out really well. And they make it so it's tougher, and they're focused all the time. And so they make it so it's really tough for the Rockets to get those openings. Because a lot of, in that, of defensive rebounding and just with guts and putbacks and all of that stuff, they take away a lot of that side of the game. And if you look at the offensive rebounding numbers for last game, they were actually tied 11-11. I don't have the first half stats in front of me, but I can almost assure you that if you look back at the first half, the first Warriors game, which was the one where the Rockets were getting blown out, that those stats will line up as well. And then obviously Tyrese took over, and him and a man were creating extra possession after extra possession and running up and down the court. But I think that's a part of it. And it's the mental side of it. And listen, I like to think that I have a knack for picking up patterns in stuff like this, right? If there's one thing that Twitter teaches you, if you try to farm it for engagement for any certain period of time, it's you start to pick up patterns really well. And I've been looking and looking and looking, and the only pattern that I have, you're gonna find this funny. The only pattern that I figured out that works across basically the entirety of the Warriors losing streak, so 15 games, So let's get into the lore of it a little bit. If we look at the last time the Rockets beat the Warriors, I'm not gonna count the summer league game, that doesn't count, right? It was a game in 2019, Russell Westbrook and James Harden era.
February 2020, but yes. It was when Jeff Green was on a 10-day contract.
See,
Absolutely.
you just spoiled it. That's my entire point.
Oh, gee, sorry.
No, that's fine. I was gonna say the only thing in common between between the last Warriors loss against the Rockets and the current team is that Jeff Green, the last time the Rockets beat the Warriors, played 24 minutes. And there's a game in between where Jeff Green plays 21 minutes and we didn't win. So what we need is we need Ime Udoka to play Jeff Green for 22 minutes at the very least, but 24 just to be safe. And that's the recipe.
Although, jokes aside, let me jump in here real quick on that point. So last week, I felt like there was a very fine line that Ime Udoka was trying to walk. Obviously, he wanted to win that game, but he didn't go full Popovich. Like, there were stretches in that Rockets-Warriors game where so much of it was clearly mental. There was bad body language. Confidence was an issue. The Warriors weren't playing their upper echelon guys. You could have won that game if you played Jeff Green or Jayshawn Tate, Aaron Holiday, Jock Landale. Instead, Ime Udoka sort of made the choice to sink or swim with his starters, especially down the stretch. I think they played the final 8 minutes of the game, and ultimately, they sank. But I understand the thought process because obviously you don't know what's going to happen. And if those guys do get you to the finish line and win, then all of a sudden you put this, enormous mental hurdle behind you. You've sort of gotten the monkey off your back. So it's very delicate. It's easy to say, well, these guys don't have it. Well, no, because then if they get you to a win, does it really, build the habits and the confidence in the guys that ultimately the starters are going to take you and hopefully help you win big games down the line. So there's a lot to, consider there. I'm not going to consider Cam Whitmore in this mix because I think it's pretty clear by now that with Cam in the G League, there's more going on there than simply, do the Rockets think they could use him in a given game? I think clearly it's more about style of play, trying to break some bad habits, because you certainly cannot argue that the Rockets wouldn't have benefited in small doses, at least, from having Cam against the Warriors and the Clippers when, especially in LA, they were without both Tari and Fred. I think it's pretty clear by now that they're playing the long game with Cam, who is still really, really young. And obviously there's a bigger picture when it comes to his development. So I'm not going to consider him in this analysis. But, the Warriors last week, that's a stretch where you could have won that game if you just went with your try-hard veterans. I don't think that's going to be a consideration Wednesday night because, if the Warriors have Steph and Draymond, I just don't think you're going to have the offensive upside to win the game if you play guys like Jeff and Jayshawn and Aaron Holiday, that sort of thing. But last week, you honestly could have if you just put in guys that play harder and, throw their bodies around and get some rebounds and finish at the rim. Rockets were uncharacteristically bad, for the season. They're the best rebounding team in the NBA. They actually got out-rebounded a decent bit by the Warriors in that game. So what do you feel about that dynamic, Paolo, and sort of trying to blend the fact that, hey, like you have these guys that are proven at the end of your bench, the 11 through 14 spots, you've got guys that are better and more established than most of the teams you're competing with. But then if you're Ime Udoka, it's not as simple as saying, well, if the starters don't have it, I'm going to go full Popovich, who was his mentor, and instantly give the Jeff Green, Jayshawn Tate tier the reins. I think what we saw last week is Ime trying to blend, hey, like we need to win this game, but I would also like to win it by allowing our starters to, grow and climb their way out of it. How do you sort of blend those dynamics, or what would you do if you were in the shoes of Ime Udoka?
Yeah, so I think with as far as playing the Feds goes, I think there's games where it makes sense to stick with the starting lineup because you likely need more variance in order to beat a certain team. Right? If you're playing the Kings, right, and someone is having an off night and they're a good offense, they're going to score a lot. Or if you're playing the Timberwolves or even the Nuggets themselves, if you're playing a team that's really highly talented, but you feel like you're going to need the variance, it makes sense to play the younger guys because You go down, but you go down giving yourself fighting chance. With the Warriors, this we're talking. Obviously, I told you guys I didn't watch the game live, but we're talking about a game that ended 99-93. The Rockets shot 38% from the field, 26% from three, 76% from the free throw line. They're struggling to put the ball in the basket. In a situation like that, where we are so far below what is league average for any player, it makes sense for you to decrease variance because getting to 100 points wins you the game. And getting to 100 points it's not hard. And so perhaps the consistency of someone like a Jeff Green, of someone like an Aaron Holiday, who, for all his faults, he's efficient. He has been efficient throughout his entire time in Houston.
And in fairness, they did play Holiday in the second half, just the second half, but that was the one lever that Ime pulled. So I'll give him some credit for that.
Yeah, and as far as, so I think it makes sense if we're talking about playing against low scoring teams. It makes sense for you to lean on the vets because you just need someone to make shots, and the vets have been doing it for a lot longer, and it's harder to throw them off their rhythm as opposed to some of the young guys. And I think that's what the Warriors truly do in their current iteration. Is they throw guys off rhythm. They force guys to take a lot of different types of shots, a lot of different contexts. As I said before, the perfect phrase for me is they muddy things up. And in a game scenario like that, I think it makes sense for you to play the older guys because they are not as, I would say, they're not as stuck in the sense of only doing well in a certain type of circumstance. And I think that would have made sense. And I wanted to touch on your point about Cam Whitmore. You guys do realize that in the games that Cam Whitmore played with the main team, and obviously there's caveats there because he's averaging 10 minutes a game this season.
Mm-hmm.
He shot 4.8% from three.
Yeah, he was really struggling.
Like he was really, really struggling. He was playing 5 minutes and taking 4 shots, playing 5 minutes and taking 4 shots, playing 8 minutes, taking 6 shots. He was coming in and he was checking. And that's just not what you want to encourage. And you can make all the arguments that you want. I think most people say that they want to bring in Cam Whitmore because he can't possibly be worse than Jalen Green. Well, for the last 3 games, Jalen Green's been damn near the best player on the team. And so even that argument doesn't stick. And I think there's more of an argument for you to not to bench, but to send Reed Shepard down with him than there is for you to and play Aaron Holiday than there is for you to bring up Cam Whitmore. And I think perhaps if you bring Reed Shepard down, he can be more of a floor general type. He can get your offense into sets. And I haven't watched the Rockets G League this season, but I imagine it's like that, like G League has always been. When an insanely talented guy comes in, he's just going to force shots whenever he wants to, and he's going to be so much more talented than the others that he's going to get crazy stat lines anyways.
Let me jump in real quick on the Reed point. I think one big difference there, the Rockets have Cam in the G League because they're trying to stylistically change some things. They don't want him to be as much of a ball stopper as he's been. So they're actually trying to change his approach to the game a little bit. I think they're open to potentially putting Reed in the G League if his struggles continue. And we have seen, Ime increasingly using Aaron Holiday as an option in the second half when it feels like it's higher stakes. But with Reed, I think he's largely seeing the floor well and competing. It's just he's missing shots. And there's an argument you can make that, if he needs to break out of his slump or get used to the longer three-point line and so on and so forth, and the length of defenders, then he needs more minutes, which the G League would give him more reps. That's fair. But it's not quite the same as Cam, where they're trying to, mentally change, how he processes, how he sees the game. With Reed, I think that's why he's gotten a longer leash. Honestly, he's playing fine in terms of how he sees the floor and what he's doing. It's just, he's missing the same shots that Aaron Holiday is making. And that's not really a shame. Aaron Holiday is much more established and, he's a really good shooter. As you pointed out, he's been efficient for a while. So for Reed as a rookie with just 1 year of college basketball under his belt to not be Aaron Holiday's level, there's no shame in that. But in terms of the G League calculation, yeah, I think if this goes on for long enough, the Rockets would send him to the G League with Cam. But the reason they haven't yet, it's not so much that oh, they like Reed more than they do Cam. No, it's just in terms of what their deficiencies are. With Cam, it's more processing. With Reed, again, it's not that there's no case for the G League, but with Reed, it's just a little more, nuanced because some of it, he is seeing the game fairly well. He's just not making the shots that he's supposed to make. And so I think that's why the calculus is a little bit different there. Sorry for interjecting.
No. My main point was I'm not even saying that they should do it right now. I'm saying there's more of an argument for you to send Reed down than there is for you to bring Cam.
Right. Yeah, I just wanted to explain because I'm sure some people will listen to that and say, well, what's the difference there? I think that's the difference. It's nuanced, but it is there. To your point on the Warriors muddying up the game. So John Schumann does his weekly power rankings for NBA.com, and they're published each Monday. They came out yesterday. He's got the Rockets at 7th in the league, which feels like, a harsh drop after being 3rd last week. But you look at the teams that jumped them. One is the Thunder. Honestly, the Rockets should have never been behind the Thunder. I think the NBA power rankings guy just wanted to do that after seeing the Rockets beat the Thunder head to head. And then the other teams, look, Dallas and Memphis have basically the same record the Rockets do, but they're more hot in recent days. And then the Warriors, look, they're a game and a half, whatever it is, behind the Rockets. But until the Rockets actually beat the Warriors, I have zero problems with someone ranking the Warriors ahead of them. So even if falling from 3 to 7 feels a little steep, I understand the thought process. Anyway, his point as far as how the Rockets match up with the Warriors. So these 2 games so far this season, the Warriors have attempted 47 free throws per 100 shots from the field in those 2 games, with that being their highest rate versus any opponent and the highest rate for any team versus the Rockets. And I think that plays into a lot of what you were saying. I know you were looking at it in terms of how savvy the Warriors are on the defensive end of the court and sort of mucking the game up. But also, if they get to the free throw line a ton and they take advantage of how aggressive the Rockets are on closeouts with guys like Dylan Brooks and Tari Eason in particular, although Tari did not play last week, if they get to the line a lot and they make it just a slugfest and they turn it into a slog in the half court, then the Rockets aren't getting guys like Amen and Tari and Jalen Green out in transition. They're not as free flowing. There's not as much rhythm to the way they play. And then if it gets into a half court slog, we know the Rockets typically don't have that bucket getter when it gets sticky in the half court. We've talked about that a lot. So I thought it was really interesting that, you pointed out rightly that the Warriors have the length and the IQ to muck it up defensively. But John Schumann of NBA.com, his point is that just how they play offensively getting to the foul line, that slows down the game a lot as well. It lets the Warriors set their defense. It prevents the Rockets from getting out in transition. And so that's potentially a factor as well.
Yeah, the last thing I was going to mention on the Warriors front is that especially Aaron Holiday makes sense if you're going to use him on ball against the Warriors because he's one of the few guys we have on the current roster that has a little bit of a flow-through game. Jalen can only pull back for mid-range shots. Fred, the same thing. Aaron Holiday is one of the guys that has it. Alperen Sengun, when he's on, is supposed to have it as well, the little push shot. And besides that, the other thing that I think is worth pointing out as well is Amen Thompson played 22 minutes this game. He was a +3 in the loss. So I think
way too low.
Yeah, you got to play him well, especially in a game where Jalen Green is absolutely stinking it up. Even if following the argument that I made earlier, even if you do need someone to be crafty and make things work, and Jalen when he's on is that, when that doesn't work, you got to get it some other way. And I mean, Thompson was a big part of the reason why in the first time around we came back along with our and so 22 minutes in a game like that, just not good enough.
Yeah, and I would say down the stretch of the game, Jalen got a lot of the vitriol post-game because most of his lowlights were in the fourth quarter, and he had a couple of possessions where he just got bumped off his spot. He didn't get a call because you rarely do in that building, and if he's not able to make plays in one-on-one situations, where else are they going to turn? And they have a lot of length, and he just doesn't have the upper body strength. It's frustrating, but it's who he is at this point. He doesn't have the physicality to overcome it, especially if they're calling the game fairly loosely the way it tends to happen, especially when you're on the road. And I understand why, because we always look back at the last 3 or 4 minutes much more closely, especially if the game is theoretically there for the taking. But the first 3 quarters count as well. And so that's what I, want to hit home again. Alperen Sengun, for the most part in that game, was dreadful. He did get some buckets in the fourth quarter. Hopefully that is, something to build on. But against a Warriors team without Steph and Draymond, and you know that all you got to do is score 100 and you're probably going to be home free, and to not be able to do it because all 3 of your big guys struggle. Yeah, it's rough, and there's a lot of things that go into that. Again, focusing on offense primarily because defensively, it wasn't perfect at the very end of the game, letting Fred get caught on a switch against Kuminga and not being able to help, and then Kuminga goes in for the game-winning layup, basically shooting straight over Fred. I mean, that's frustrating, but again, let's not hyper-analyze the final possessions so much more just because they're the final possessions. When you look at the game as a whole, you did not lose the game defensively or anything close to if you hold the opponent below 100 points. You lost it offensively, which is exactly where you've lost the previous games against the Warriors as well, especially in the first half when you haven't been able to turn it into, a frenetic up and down scramble game the way they were the second half of that opener against the Warriors in November. The other games when the Rockets, especially the starters, have tried to execute in the half court, they've not gotten much going at all. And that's what's ultimately got to change if they are going to win this game on Wednesday night. All right, before we close out the pod, I want to look forward to the weekend because, again, difficult week, not only because of the NBA Cup. You would expect that because the teams advancing to the Final Four in each conference are the best. So you would expect to play upper echelon teams. That's just simply how it works in any sort of tournament or postseason format. And that's certainly the case here. But you're also going to have a game coming up. If the Rockets beat the Warriors, then you'll be in Vegas for the semifinals, which is a fantastic stage. I hope that happens. That would be great for these guys' development. And in the semifinals, you would play the winner of Oklahoma City and Dallas on Saturday. And if you do not advance to the semifinals, then you've got to get to the 82-game schedule. All these NBA Cup games also count towards the regular season with the lone exception of the championship. That's because for those teams, it would be 83 games and it would be imbalanced. But the team that's available to you is the loser of the other quarterfinal game. And so if the Rockets lose to the Warriors, they would face the loser of Thunder Mavs tonight. And it's a little bit frustrating because in a perfect world, the Rockets would play their quarterfinal first, because the way I'm looking at it, if the Rockets win, I would rather play the Mavs. But if the Rockets lose, well, if the Rockets win, I'd rather play the Mavs. And that means hoping for the Mavericks to beat the Thunder. But if the Rockets lose, I would rather see the Thunder beat the Mavs, because in that case, you would draw the Mavs in that consolation game, if you will. I guess just looking at those two potential opponents and, some of the themes we've been discussing throughout this episode, I know the Rockets beat the Thunder, but it took a lot of things going right for them, especially Fred VanVleet magnet ball down the stretch, for them to win that game at home. I think the Thunder are much more capable of turning the game into a slog, which is where the Rockets, especially as young as they are, have tended to struggle. As opposed to Dallas, look, it's not that a game against the Mavs is ever easy. They're 17-8. They've won like 7 straight games. Luka and Kyrie are great, but it's typically very free-flowing, and those are games where the Rockets and even Jalen Green tend to do really well. We saw the Rockets win at the end of October in Dallas with Jalen as the best player in that game. It's a matchup where the Mavs have the firepower that you can't assume a victory by any means, but I feel like just the way they play benefits the Rockets a lot more than facing the Thunder, especially if it's in Oklahoma City, especially if you lose to the Warriors and you got to go to OKC, where the Rockets, that's the one spot they've been blown out at really this entire season. That's the only game they've been uncompetitive at. I know the Rockets beat the Thunder a week ago, and it's the NBA, especially in the regular season. Anybody can beat anybody. But I just feel like in terms of how they match up with the other two teams, and potentially if they are lucky enough to get to the semifinals, to me, with the way the Rockets want to play, with the way they defend, and with what it takes for them to sort of mitigate their offensive shortcomings, which is what we've been discussing most of this pod, to me, I feel like Dallas is clearly a much more favorable matchup than Oklahoma City. Would you agree with that, Paolo?
No.
Really? Okay, explain.
And it's pretty simple. As long as Luka plays, I'd rather take the Thunder. I know we beat them last time. We also beat the Thunder. Last season, we managed to beat the Thunder later on as well. I think while I do agree with you against some teams that the more free flowing style benefits us, I actually think with the Thunder, I think we
I think
mentioned
that did play in that game. The Rockets beat them. Just want to clarify that, but
yeah,
go on.
I know, but over his last 7 games, so going back to last season, over the last 7 games, he's averaging against us 40, 10, and 9. And
Yeah.
we all remember the 50-point game that we was just hopeless. He was just gonna make everything. I'm terrified of Luka playing against us in a way that I'm not terrified of Shea when he's playing against us. Partly because Shea's gonna do it from the mid range, so it's not 3-point bomb after 3-point bomb after 3-point bomb. And I think we can play the Warriors' role against the Thunder better than we can do against the Mavs. And I think I'm more comfortable sticking Eman Thompson on Shea, sticking Tari Eason or Dylan Brooks or on Jalen Williams or a different combination of those than I am on sticking any of those on Luka, because with Luka at a certain point it just doesn't matter, and you're not gonna face guard him 3 steps behind 3-point line. Against the Rockets he makes those shots anyway. So it's, to me, every time I watch us play against Luka, it just feels hopeless, and so I'd rather face the Thunder. Although my prediction as far as how the NBA Cup will go, listen, no team's beating the Rockets 16 times in a row. We're beating the Warriors. They're not going to be the 16 times. It's too much. 15 is it's not a round number. It's a multiple of 5. That's not, they're not going to beat us 16 times. 15 was enough. So we're going to beat the Warriors. And then the Mavs are going to beat the Thunder. We're going to face the Mavs. We're going to beat the Mavs. And we are going to lose in the final against, I think it will be the Cavs.
That would honestly be, I mean, obviously the best case scenario is winning it, but I mean, that's a very close second because that final game, if you lose, it doesn't even count against you in the regular season standing. So you get all the benefits in terms of the exposure, seeing how your guys perform under the bright lights. Obviously, you don't get the trophy and the banner, quote unquote. But other than that, I mean, you get all the benefits and you wouldn't even have a loss going on your ledger pertaining to the regular season.
And I think so. And this is actually the last makes a bit countersense. So if I were to pick all of these games individually, I'd probably have us losing against the Mavs and I'd probably have us winning against the Cavs, just because from a matchup standpoint, we have the guys to throw at Donovan Mitchell, we have the guys to throw at Darius Garland, and their double big lineup doesn't scare me as much considering how we like to play, this year. But I think when you're making predictions, that's always something that goes completely against the grain. And so
Yeah.
I'm factoring the fact that something that I would have predicted something wrong, and I'm switching those games because of it.
Fair. And I'll give a little bit on my prediction. I think OKC is better than Dallas. I know Dallas is on their win streak, but when you look at who they've beaten, there's a lot of Utah, Portland, Toronto. It's not as good as you would think when you look under the hood. And I just feel like, Dallas has had Oklahoma City's number for a while. They've actually won 5 of 6 dating back to the playoffs last year. But I just feel like OKC is too good of a team, Shea too good of a player for that to continue. In much the same way that you're saying that 16 games is too long for the Warriors to beat the Rockets, or really 6 games when we talk about this iteration of the Rockets. But I think seeing the Thunder lose 6 of 7 to the Mavs is a bit aggressive as well, especially when OKC is a better team overall. But to your point, I'm looking back, it's a closer call than I first thought, because when you were making your case, I was looking up the data. So yeah, the Rockets did get blown out in OKC, but aside from just one game, there was Chet Holmgren in that game. There's no Chet Holmgren now, and I think Holmgren's rim protection is uniquely valuable against Alperen, Sengun, and especially Jalen Green, because of how it deters the drives in a way that Isaiah Hartenstein just can't. So I think that's a factor. And then the Dallas games, I think back to, the Rockets lost 2 close games in Dallas last year where they were extremely competitive, including that game in April that eliminated the Rockets from the playoffs, or from playoff contention, in which the Rockets led by a ton throughout most of that game before coughing up late. That was when Reggie Bullock didn't foul up 3 and Jabari Smith missed both of the final free throws when the Rockets had a chance to put it away. So they were very competitive in those games in Dallas. But sandwiched in between that, to your point, Paolo, was that game where Luka just went absolutely nuts in Houston and ended the winning streak. So, yeah, I can't blame you if you're just sort of psychologically scarred by everything that Luka Doncic has done over the years. And you're right. If he's connecting from three and he's hot, then that adds another layer to his game that even SGA doesn't have. With all that said, I'm picking the Rockets to beat the Warriors. I can't believe I'm doing that with everything I said last Thursday and all the frustration. But yeah, it has to happen sometime. They're at home. The energy should be through the roof. And I'm predicting they will lose to Oklahoma City in the semifinal. I just think OKC, when they are right, is a tough matchup for the Rockets. Perhaps not as tough as they are with Chet, but still really tough. I think the Rockets defensively can do a lot of things to muck it up, as you said. I'm just not sure offensively where they go, especially if they're not getting a home whistle, with all the ref you suck chants against Ben Taylor in the middle of that Rockets Thunder game a couple of weeks ago when SGA kept getting those calls. I think Houston actually benefited down the stretch. Refs realized they, to get out of the building alive, they didn't want to call every single potential infraction. They didn't want the game to go on forever. And so the Rockets got to play a little bit physically with SGA down the stretch. Might not get the same whistle at a neutral site. So, yeah, I'm going to just go with Oklahoma City. I think they're the best team. And so I think they'll beat Dallas and I think they'll beat Houston. But I think just getting to Vegas in the semifinals is a win for this organization no matter what. And as long as you get that game, this is where we'll close. As long as you get that game against the Warriors on Wednesday, you end that streak, but you also secure nothing worse than a 500 week, because even if you lose in the semifinals, you end up 1-1. And so you're right back where you started, 8 games over 500. After the NBA Cup concludes, and I'm going to throw this scenario where, if the Rockets lose to the Warriors and they play the loser of OKC Dallas, it's not technically an NBA Cup game, but I'm going to consider it NBA Cup because it's basically like a consolation game that just happens to count towards the regular season standings. It's like a soccer/football tournament where the losers play the third place game, if you will. So I'm going to consider that NBA Cup. And so when the schedule truly starts back up and you don't have these long breaks between games because of the Cup, starting December 19th, next Thursday, here's the next 10 games for the Rockets. Pelicans, Raptors, Hornets, Pelicans again, Timberwolves, Heat, Mavs, Celtics, Lakers, Wizards. That's a stretch from December 19th through January 7th where the Rockets can make a lot of hay. 6 of those 10 are at home, including a 5-game homestand right after Christmas to start the new year. Again, Pelicans twice, Hornets, Raptors, Timberwolves, Heat, Mavs, Celtics, Lakers, and Wizards. If you can get through this week at 500, the schedule's been rough of late, maybe not quite as rough because of the injuries, but rough nonetheless, and it will definitely be rough this week. To me, that's a stretch that, we'll make our predictions in a future episode, but I think that's where the Rockets have a real opportunity to do some damage, reel off a 7-3, maybe even an 8-2 if you can get hot at home, where you have some tougher opponents, but you are within the friendly home confines of Toyota Center, where the Rockets have been outstanding this season. They've been much improved on the road relative to last year, but way better at home. They're 7-5 on the road right now, but 9-3 inside Toyota Center. And so, yeah, if you get through this next week, and even 0-2 isn't the end of the world because there's just 2 games. But if you can get through it at 1-1 or better, then yeah, you could very easily get into, back into the number 2 spot, and maybe even build up, a little bit of a buffer before the schedule does get difficult starting around the middle of January. So that's the good news. If it feels like the schedule's been rough of late with road games and tough opponents, it has been, but it is about to ease up. You are almost to the end of this tunnel. Just get through this week. Hopefully the Rockets can steal at least 1 game, and the easiest and most fun way to do that would be by simply beating the Warriors, finally, after all this time, and doing it on national television on Wednesday night when the Rockets are playing in an NBA Cup quarterfinal at Toyota Center. Hope to see many of you guys, our loyal listeners, there. Anyway, with that, we'll bring this episode to a close. And if you want more content before our next show, the best place to get it is online, where you can follow me on Twitter/X at Ben Dubose and this show at The Logger Line. And of course, if you go to The Logger Line's page, you can find links to our distribution partners, Apple, Google, Spotify. You can subscribe, leave a positive review at your location of choice. We greatly appreciate that. And also on that same page, of course, you can hit up Links to friends, sponsors, partners of the program, USA Today's Rockets Bar, Carback Brewing, Sports Talk 790. Please consume their content as well. And if you can, tell them that we sent you on by. And then, should have mentioned, Paolo is on Twitter at Paolo Alves NBA. I know it's X, but come on, I'm never going to want to say that. And as far as future episodes, of course, we'll keep you updated as one of those frequent podcasts covering Houston Rockets basketball. Lately, we've been doing about once a week early in the week because that's been, the break in the schedule. The Rockets not playing between Sunday and Wednesday this week. Schedule may change a little bit as we get towards the holidays. Obviously, we do have personal lives, and also the schedule is going to get a little more jam-packed. So in terms of when the episodes come out, we may change up things a little bit once, the games become more frequent. And so we have to sort of balance out the NBA schedule and also our personal schedules. This is just the way things have worked out for now. We should have about one more week of this as the Cup winds down. Hopefully, we're talking about potentially a Cup final this time a week from now. But, keep your fingers crossed. First things first, beat the Warriors, and then get to Vegas, and let's talk about where things go from there. Anyway, that's just sort of a lay of the land for why we've been doing things this way the last few weeks. It may change in the weeks ahead. Stick with us. We'll have you covered no matter what. Anyway, with those plugs and that disclaimer out of the way, we will adjourn for today. For Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.